Ladies and gentlemen, ladies and gentlemen, welcome into three men talking fantasy football, and in this case, two men. I am Mr. Bill DeCouslis, and I'm here with a special new guest today, Mr. John DeCouslis. How are you doing, sir?
I'm doing good, Bill. How are you?
I am all right. I am all right. We are in the middle of the off season. We finished a lot of our series on talking about the top finishers at every position. We've already covered running backs, wide receivers, tight ends, and today we're going to be talking a little bit of quarterbacks. Let's talk a little news from around the league first. So I believe the only coaching change that we didn't cover in the past was the Kellen Moore hiring, who nobody saw coming to the New Orleans Saints. Now, if there was one division in football that I probably couldn't pick, A, who's going to win, B, how it's going to go, it's probably the NFC South. I don't know how much more competitive the Saints are going to be. I've always had a soft spot in my heart for Derek Carr, but like their offense is going to have to improve significantly. Do you think this helps Derek Carr significantly or not? Like,
So I don't think Derek Carr is going to be in New Orleans next year. They are, as we speak, somewhere around 80 million over the cap. So they're going to have to cut a significant amount of talent just to get uh, under the cap to start the new league year. They're probably not going to have a lot of money to be able to bring in any free agents. They're probably just going to only be able to sign their rookie class and just try to gut the failed experiments that they've tried to keep alive after Drew Brees' last several years. So I do think Kellen Moore is going to be a good head coach. I just don't know if the year one where they're going to be something to be reckoned with in the NFC.
but
To
but
me, I
it's
think yeah,
but like but which cast of characters are they going to be cutting? Like I like we've seen a failure from Kendra Miller, so I don't know if he's among that list. Kamara, he's locked in, so he's part of the old guard. Um, is that the end for Taysom Hill? I mean, he's coming back from that injury. Like, I mean, like Olave is a talented guy that they're gonna like. So, which major people are we talking about? Tertiary linemen? Like, who are we talking about?
yeah, there are a lot of the defenders are long in the tooth at this point. So a couple of them are going to just have to get cut. It's
Cam
just the
Jordan.
nature of
Yeah.
what the NFL is. Derek Carr for New Orleans because I don't think New Orleans is a Super Bowl esque kind of franchise for 2025. So there's really no reason for them to hold on to a 35-year-old quarterback that's going to want a healthy amount of money, and they're going to save more money on the cap if they let him go rather than keeping him on the roster if he's going to be disgruntled. For
Okay.
Olave, he had obviously a lot of significant issues for injuries over the course of the last couple of seasons. I would not be surprised if they ended up taking a receiver in the draft, but that's a conversation for another day.
Yeah. Well, it's kind of fortuitous that we're talking about Carr. So most notably, we're not going to be talking extensively about Derek Carr today. We'll be covering. So yeah. So let's just jump right. Let's just jump right into that. So quarterbacks. 1 to 12. So let's just lay the land real quick. So as we mentioned all the time, this is covering weeks 1 through 17. We are not counting week 18 because that's irrelevant. Like so many teams weren't playing, and obviously most people don't have their championships that week anyway. So weeks 1 to 17, we're covering quarterbacks finishing 1 to 12 in half PPR and 4 point passing touchdown leagues, and some honorable and dishonorable mentions. Um, yeah, so no other precursors. Let's just jump in. So finishing at number one, we have no surprise to anybody this year, Lamar Jackson, far and away the best quarterback this year. He was good throughout the entire season. There wasn't really one week that you could point to that he did not help your team. He was just unbelievable. Now, um, one thing to note from my perspective is, you have this kind of a year from Lamar Jackson, which was which he didn't win the MVP. It was an MVP caliber year. Okay. He won the MVP last year and he won the MVP in 2019. The point I want to make is in 2019, his season was just as good as this, if not better. It was every single week. He was crushing it. He was good for your ADP. It was great, unbelievable, great season. The
Mm-hmm.
same with this season, both of which were MVP caliber.
Right.
Last year, he won the MVP, and it was not as good as this. He won the MVP, and it was basically every other week you were unhappy with it. I've had this discussion with other people. I'll get your opinion on it. Me being scared with Lamar Jackson is because of that. It's, oh great, we got this amazing year. Every week was great. Last year he was the MVP. Every other week it was a game losing player that you started. Should I be less scared going forward into next year, or what do you think?
At some points, the wheels that he has, being able to run the ball and be such a dual threat, is eventually going to diminish. I don't know if that's going into 2025. Obviously, over the course of his time in Baltimore, the offense has evolved. So he's absolutely the focal point of the offense. Derrick Henry getting there for 24 was a godsend, and there was a reason why they finished where they did in the AFC. For moving forward with him, I would be comfortable drafting him pretty early. I don't see any significant fall off from him, at least going into next season. The concern is going to be how much he's going to run the ball moving forward. I don't think that's going to scare folks for next year, but moving forward long term for you dynasty owners, you may want to, if you can get a option for a trade, you may want to at least consider it at this point now because he's been in the league for 7 years, if I'm not mistaken. So
His rookie
something at
was
least to,
2018. So
rattle your brains around, especially for you dynasty owners.
I don't disagree with you. I think that let me argue with myself. So part of it is that uh, he ran the ball as much as he did, and he passed the ball as well as he did, even
Right.
given that Derrick Henry got 1,800 yards rushing and a million carries, etc. So
Correct.
even if you know, like oh great, Derrick Henry's that like he was there this year. So even if Derrick Henry loses X amount of touches slash yards or whatever, presumably the beneficiary of such, whether it be passing or running the ball, is going to be Lamar Jackson. So I'm not at so whatever backing off in certain ways Lamar Jackson, presumably it will be gained from a lesser Derrick Henry. I mean, Derrick Henry's he's not going to keep going forever and ever. At some point, it's going to end.
I thought he
So
was done 2 years ago. So what do I know?
yeah,
So
it's weird. Bet it's weird, taking a bet against him, but it's just another year. Um, yeah, it'll be interesting to see how ADP shakes out, but I'm always cautious about going early on onesie positions, especially quarterback, where you can find. We should probably mention that it's very easy to find a fill-in quarterback that could get you top 12 numbers from a week-to-week basis. The question is playing your matchups and making good decisions. I know a lot of people like to avoid all that when they get a guy, and I mean, you're not going to argue with game-winning performances every single week from Lamar Jackson, but remember, like his ADP was QB4. So I mean,
right.
uh, I imagine his ADP is going to be one or two going into next year. If his ADP doesn't return that, then it's going to be a completely wasted pick.
Well,
So
let me give you a scenario here. Are you more comfortable injury wise for Lamar Jackson or Jaden Daniels?
I would have to know. You mean from taking from a fantasy? I would have to know what their ADP is. So if the ADP on Jaden Daniels, let's say, is in the fifth round, and the ADP on Lamar Jackson is in the third round, I'll take Jaden Daniels all day long, personally. It might also be how you philosophize on your own team, but yeah. Um, let's move on because this is exactly related to this conversation. So finishing at number two is Josh Allen. So I don't have the stat in front of me, but I believe Josh Allen has finished one or two since 2018 or 2019. So that's about as consistent as you could get.
Yep.
That's 5 straight years finishing as number one or number two. In terms of cashing in on draft capital on quote unquote sure things, he's about as close as you could get. Now, uh, it was a little bit shaky in the beginning of the year. He had two real bad games sandwiched between some two really good games. But after that, it definitely picked up and it went right back to the Josh Allen that you all know and love. I mean, unfortunately, just because the Bills were a function of like how some of the games were going. I mean, he let you down in the semifinals in week 16, but it's just because of how the game went. I mean, you know, sandwich between, of course, a 50-point game and a 40-point game. But that's what you get out of Josh Allen. Like that's why you draft him that high.
I would be much more comfortable for next year drafting Josh Allen over Lamar Jackson. I think for the first month of the year for 24, it was a bit of a transition offensive wise for Buffalo because a lot of the offensive talent they had, Savon Diggs' head shirt, were no longer there. So there's going to be a little bit of a learning curve and a long season in the NFL for them to figure out how they're going to run their offense. Um, in regards for health wise, I know Josh Allen, takes a lot more hits than Lamar Jackson does, but I still feel more comfortable just based off his frame that he's going to make it 17 games. Especially if I'm a drafter that wants to invest in these kinds of quarterbacks early in the draft. I want the stability that he's going to be there for all 17 games, rather than somebody that I get a little uncomfortable there. I need to take a backup quarterback earlier that may affect me taking another position. So that's something to keep in mind moving forward.
What I mean, how early? I mean, this is a philosophical question, but like
Hmm.
how early, let's say Josh Allen, because he's always return on investment, he'll get you it. How early would you be willing to go personally drafting a quarterback?
For
Because
me,
his price tag has been like 212 every year, basically.
it depends where I'm at in the order. I one year took Josh Allen in the second round. I ended up winning that league. Go figure. There was another year where Josh Allen was drafted in the fourth round. So I would say for me, comfortably somewhere in the third round, I would be okay with him. Lamar Jackson, guys of that ilk that are going to be able to also get you fantasy points on the ground along with their arm. I'm definitely not comfortable anymore taking somebody like Patrick Mahomes that early. I know still some folks are still very, very high on him in regards for fantasy purposes. Obviously, he's an excellent quarterback, just not so much to be drafted that high for fantasy football. So be leery of that if you want to take the quarterback early, because it could also risk versus reward. You can also get burnt very bad by it as well, taking quarterback that high.
Yeah. And like we said, like there are, if you're quote unquote streaming quarterbacks, or if you're kind of playing around with the waiver wire, because it is a onesie position, it's a perfectly viable way to play. Most of the time, that's how I'm playing. You could always you can find somebody to get you in there and get you by. But, streaming quarterbacks for the most part aren't going to get you 50 points. And that's what
Sure.
guys like Josh, that's what you're getting the draft investment on.
There's a particular guy on that notion of being smart with your drafting that when we get to him, I'll cover in regards to somebody being much more value for your pick, even
Okay.
though he's not a flashy name. Okay.
Yeah. So now let's get into some interesting names here. So, as we mentioned, Lamar Jackson finished number one with 411 points. Nearly 30 points behind him was Josh Allen with 385. Josh Allen, you drafted him as the QB1, finishes QB2. Lamar Jackson finishes QB4, finishes QB1. So in the same realm of where you drafted guys. Finishing at QB3, we've got Joe Burrow with 368 points on a team that finished whatever it was, 9-8 or something. Now you drafted him as the QB7. Obviously, he blew that out of the water. He's very extremely good value for where you drafted him as, but that's not the tale of basically what happened here. Joe Burrow, after let's say week 4, starting from week 5, and basically after maybe one or two little lull games, week 9 on, he was the quarterback one. Now it was interesting. I mean, we had the whole narrative of he could have won an MVP if he was on a better team. Now, who knows if that would or would not have happened? Who knows what their team would have looked like? All I know is from a fantasy perspective, it was unbelievable. He is, to me, one of the only quarterbacks that has guaranteed production, even considering that he doesn't run the ball. Um, and to me, that's it. I mean, when you've got targets like T. Higgins and Jamar Chase doing great, he's going to be great every single year. I am considering what the ADP is on Joe Burrow every single year. Now, I know this past year it wasn't so crazy, but uh, I always try to get myself a running quarterback, so I'm always leery about how high I go, and also I'm a proponent of later quarterbacks in general. I don't know. To you, is it incumbent upon if T Higgins is back, if you're going to be all in on Joe Burrow next year? I guess.
Uh, I don't think Cincinnati's going to bring back T. Higgins. I think they're going to either franchise him and then trade him, but I don't think he's going to be back in
Oh,
25.
I believe. See, we should have covered that in news. They franchised him for the second time.
So they may have
Right.
franchised him now. I don't think he's going to be on the roster for the 25 season. In a matter for Joe Burrow's purposes, I don't think it really matters. I think he's still going to be
Right.
putting up, roughly 35 to 40 touchdowns next year because the defense was an absolute disaster, forcing the offense to have to consistently move the ball and score points. Is it going to be as juicy as it was for 24? I don't think so because I mean, how bad as a defense can you be? They're going to have some sort of improvement going into next year. But I'm very, very comfortable taking Joe Burrow as my QB1 earlier in the draft. I wouldn't take him earlier than maybe a guy like Josh Allen, but maybe a half a round later from that, I would be comfortable taking Joe Burrow.
So let me just paint this picture. Okay. So Joe Burrow this past year, all right, 4,900 yards, 43 touchdowns, 9 interceptions. Okay. And that's good enough to finish as the QB3. And that's a crazy, crazy stat line. To your point, let's say he throws 33 touchdowns and he throws for about 4,200 yards.
Right.
That's not gonna be good enough. So I mean, this is what we're saying about the running quarterback thing. Like you have to have astronomical numbers as a pure passer if you're going to be, top five relevant or, game winning relevant. Like it's for that reason that I'm like a little bit cautious of that stuff. But to your point, like if T Higgins doesn't hold out, which I guess is an inevitability at
Don't,
this point.
don't forget too, Jamar Chase is still under his rookie contract and he's looking for a new deal. So I don't see a situation where Cincinnati is going to pay Joe Burrow 50 million plus, Jamar Chase 35 million, 36 million per year, and then what's T Higgins' number? That's an
Yeah,
awful lot of money to put at three positions when there's 50 other spots on the roster need to fill. So
I guess
I
that's
think they're
true.
going to end up drafting a receiver and letting T. Higgins get traded, which they can get a lot of value for him. And I'm sure there's plenty of teams in the NFL that are willing to give a first round pick to go get T. Higgins and give him a healthy contract. I'm just concerned T. Higgins by himself, if he's a true number one receiver. I don't know. We've seen it time and time again in the NFL over the last 30, 40 years. The number two receiver in an excellent offense gets a big money deal in a new team and doesn't really act as if he's the number one receiver. So but with regards for Joe Burrow and whatnot, I still think Cincinnati's offense is still going to be top five in the NFL. Is he going to put up the same numbers he put up this year? It's probably not, but I think he's going to be close enough to it where folks are comfortable taking him.
Well, I could tell you personally, the next guy we'll talk about, I would definitely take him over next year. And so let's just jump into that. So finishing at QB4 is Jaden Daniels. Another great value in the draft. So finishing with 361 points, just behind Joe Burrow. Now Jaden Daniels was great. He had one or two games that were not so good, including the game that he kind of halfway got injured in, and then Mariota came in, and Mariota had a decent game or two actually himself. Now, I'm a big Jaden Daniels fan, and I think that it's going to be more of the same. Now, presumably, he's only going to get better going from his rookie to his sophomore year. Um, that being said, I mean the NFL is fast. People learn how to adapt. They learn how to play them. But the Washington offense looked great. Cliff Kingsbury had them running on all cylinders. Cliff Kingsbury's back next year. There's no relevant changes in their coordinators. There's no relevant changes on some of their major personnel. They've got their running backs. They got their offensive linemen back. They got most of their defense back. I'm going to be a big all in on Jaden Daniels. Now you're gonna have to pay for it. It's gonna be. I mean, I was just checking on Underdog. He's the QB3. So I
Uh, I
mean,
I disagree with you. I don't think Jaden Daniels is going to put up the same numbers that he did this year going into 25. Yes,
really, why?
Cliff Kingsbury is back, but now defenses and teams have had a whole season worth of time to watch him and to figure out how they're going to defend him moving forward. So I don't think he's going to. Also on his own, it's kind of hard to put up really, really good numbers every single week, every single year. It's really, really hard to do. Also, too, I will give him props. I've watched him in a lot of primetime games. He is excellent at staying healthy and avoiding getting hit by some of these linebackers and safeties. So, for a matter of health, I would rather have him over Lamar Jackson. But
You would
I
rather
don't,
have Jaden Daniels over Lamar Jackson
just because I think Jaden Daniels does a better job of
from
not
from from
getting
a from a from a fantasy perspective. Or are you talking like an NFL owner?
for fantasy. It's a fantasy show we're doing.
Okay.
If
Well,
I
then
would
I'm
rather,
saying like if you're not so high on Jaden Daniels, and you're saying that you'd rather have him over Lamar Jackson, that
right,
means that you've got some serious ranking situation there. So that means you've got Lamar Jackson below Jaden Daniels. Now that means who do you have over those two? Presumably Josh Allen. Who else do you have over them?
I would have Josh Allen, Joe Burrow 1 and 2, and I think there's a
Really?
bit of, and I would have there's a little bit of a gap for me between Josh Allen and Joe Burrow. May not be number wise, but I do think moving into 25 because of Josh Allen's rushing touchdown ability, which don't forget about that. That's what's going to make him the QB1 for next year, especially now having another year with the same talent around him. Jaden Daniels wise, the Eagles are still there in the NFC. They're still going to give Washington fits. Also, too, for the dynasty owners, how long is Cliff Kingsbury going to be there? He's an offensive mind that had a chance in Arizona. Who knows if in 2026 he gets an offer to go be head coach somewhere? What does Jaden Daniels look like then? CJ Stroud had a fantastic rookie year, had a terrible sophomore year.
That's true. There
So
should be cautionary tales. You're right. I mean, but I don't know. Under no circumstances would I be putting Joe Burrow ahead of both of them, Lamar Jackson and Jaden Daniels. But
Well,
I mean,
I think you and I are on the same page where we don't like the idea of taking quarterbacks early. We like to kind of string
sure.
quarterbacks week to week. So we're of the similar opinion.
Well, I mean, to that point, I bet you a lot of these guys are not going to be on my teams because of what their current ADP is. But again, we'll wait and see how ADP shakes out.
Sure.
Um, but again, Jaden Daniels, great value for where you drafted him. He was the QB 13 going off the board, finished
No question.
QB 4.
Absolute great value for 24. No question.
So let's talk about another guy who got you some value. So finishing at QB5 here, we have Mr. Baker Mayfield, star quarterback for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, drafted as the QB 21, going in and crushing it, finishing as the QB5. I mean, really, considering how he finished 2023, we should have seen this coming. I mean, he was just great. He was great even when he didn't have Evans and Godwin. I mean, as you know, we had the
Yeah.
stretch of time where it was the Kate Otten, and I know you weren't with us when we discussed some of the lower tier wide receivers, but I mean, one of my favorite fantasy football player from last year was Jalen McMillions, who's basically usurped the number 2 role in Tampa, and depending on how long Evans goes for, he might take the number 1 at some point. Like I'm so big on Jalen McMillions, but really that's a function of being so high on Baker Mayfield here. So I mean, let's just quickly get into it. Like I said, 1 or 2 games where it wasn't so good, but the rest of the year he crushed it. And they have, other than losing the guy, oh my god, I'm gonna forget his name. He's the coach now of Jacksonville who did the Duval nonsense.
Liam Cohen.
Liam Cohen. Other than losing Liam Cohen, almost the entire team is back. So should I be all bullish on Baker Mayfield going forward?
Well, now this is the second year in a row where the offensive coordinator left to go take a head coaching job in Tampa.
Right.
So
But
is
it
this
didn't
fun?
matter.
It didn't matter. That's true for this year. Baker Mayfield definitely had an excellent, 2024 season for fantasy football. If you looked at his playoff numbers for 15, 16, and 17, it was absolutely fantastic
Oof.
for you. 29, 23, and 34, which is absolutely fantastic for a quarterback, especially where he got drafted. I also would not be surprised if people were able to get him off the wire earlier in the
Yep.
year. But my concern is, yes, he had an absolutely fantastic 24. What does it look like now with yet another offensive coordinator for a third different offensive coordinator for a third year? Does that mean it's a similar kind of numbers, which is great? I would be a little hesitant taking him early or even as my QB1. Um, how is Mike Evans still going to perform at the level of what he has? This is now going to be his 12th season next year.
Right.
So at some point, does the bottom going to fall off for him? Godwin probably is not going to be back in Tampa. Bucky Irving is an absolute beast, which is absolutely going to help out Baker Mayfield for the entire season, in order to keep things consistent and within single score games for the offense. But I think there's going to be a little bit of transition in Tampa in regards to how they're going to handle their receiving core. So, and how the offense is going to look. So I still think it's Tampa's division though for the NFC South, but we'll see.
Yeah, and Baker, I don't have the stat in front of me, but Baker ran the ball a lot more than so I mean if he's getting you a few hundred yards rushing too, that's a decent enough baseline, way better than Joe Burrow's. Um so for like from a pocket passing perspective, he still was great. And I agree with every single word you said. I mean, I'd be perfectly happy rolling with Baker Mayfield. Now again, we should mention, I mean, we'll talk draft strategy later in the offseason, but when you're picking up your QB, unless it's like Josh Allen or maybe, throwing a couple guys up top, you definitely want to keep in mind their early season schedule, especially their first two to three games.
Mm.
Because if there are awful matchups, like if you're playing Philadelphia, game one, maybe I'm not going to be as crazy depending on, like, so if it's now we don't know what the schedule is going to be just yet, but it's worth keeping in mind. And Baker Mayfield, it's not like he was matchup dependent or anything, but it's just worth keeping in mind. Case in point, the next guy we're going to talk about.
Mm-hmm.
So finishing at number 6 in the most let's say misleading finish of all time is as Jared Goff. Jared Goff finishing with 324 points. That's 30 points behind Baker Mayfield. It's a significant drop. This is a tier break there. Now, you drafted him as the QB 15, so great. Everybody should be so happy that you picked up Jared Goff and you played him the whole year, right?
Right.
Wrong. Absolutely wrong. I personally had Jared Goff on a lot of my teams, especially coming from out of week one, because obviously I knew it was going to be a great team. They were in the dome. They were home for 3 out of the 4 games. They were playing bad teams. Coming out week 1, 12 points, week 2, 10 points, week 3, 15 points. It was a disaster. I ended up dropping him, and I ended up being happy that I dropped him because that's the Jared Goff thing. It used to be more predictable on home and being in the dome and points, but no, it's just this is a function of the Lions offense. They might not need Goff to do anything. He might get you 5 points. He might get you 50 points because, I mean, he might get you 30 points, might get you 10 points. That's what it is. Now, I will say, as the year went on, and most notably when David Montgomery went down, there was a significant pickup in their passing offense. We talked about this when we talked about Jameson Williams. So from let's say weeks 11 on, it was like he had that dud in week 12, but week 13 on, it was really great. I mean, and he basically won you your championships week 15, 40 points, week 16, 25 points, week 17, 25 points. Again, if David Montgomery was there, I would have been less bullish on starting him for all of the times, depending on the matchups. But Jared Goff off your board next year for all the same reasons, or?
So it sounds as if you're higher on Mayfield than you are on Goff. Is that
Yes,
correct? Okay.
100%.
So I'm opposite of you. I'm much more higher on Goff than I am on Mayfield. I think there's a significantly better structure in Detroit for them offensively. Yes, they run the ball considerably more as
Pass
an
the ball
overall.
with linemen. Yeah.
But I do think that because they are in that dome, and yes, they've lost some coaching pieces and they're going to lose some players because it was an excellent team last year. I still think that if you're looking for value at quarterback and you need a QB1, he is an excellent option for you. So I know that he had some duds, especially earlier in the year, which I'm seeing what you're seeing on here. I absolutely can understand that, but I don't think that both Gibbs and Montgomery are going to have the years that they had last year together. It's kind of hard to have two backs that both have 1,000-yard seasons. That's really hard. So I think
But
moving forward,
from a predictability standpoint, that's the problem. Like it used to be like, hey, Jared Goff is home. Jared Goff is in a dome. Jared Goff is playing a bad defense. Well, let's go get your 50 points. I mean, but really it's turned out to, unless Detroit needs to shoot it out with somebody, which
I have more confidence in Amon-Ra St. Brown and Jameson Williams and Laporta than I have
uh,
in Kate Otten, wide receiver number 2 in Tampa, and Mike Evans.
I,
So
I agree with that, but I have more confidence. I mean, when you have it's Gibbs and Montgomery. That's what makes this, you know. So
yeah,
again, like and also from a consistency perspective, and also like we said, Baker Mayfield runs the ball more, and you know, like again, we can have a gentleman's disagreement about this. It'll be interesting to see, you know, how what the first of all, it'll be interesting to see what the Lions do in the draft, where they look to address. I mean, most of their defense was decimated towards the end of the year, so that contributed to the Goff situation too. That they did have to air the ball out more. Yeah, it's an interesting little conversation. Let's move on to a name that I'm much going to be much higher on for next year. So finishing at number 7 is Jalen Hurts, finishing with 320 points, just behind Goff. Now, his average betrays that slightly. He'd finish a bit above that because he did not play in week 17.
mhm.
Now, I am of the opinion that if it's me, judging by how things are, Jalen Hurts is going to be one of the best values in the draft next year. Now we'll wait to see how ADP goes out. My logic is that you have a year in which he finished as the QB7. He was drafted as a QB3, so he didn't exactly hold up. However, you have Saquon Barkley going for 10 trillion yards. You have Saquon Barkley going for however many 13, 15, 11 touchdowns. I don't have the number in front of me. Jalen Hurts did his thing. He got his, you know, tush push touchdowns at the 1 yard line
Mhm.
to the amount that he always gets, 10 plus. But he had a significantly reduced passing offense to the detriment of AJ Brown, etc. Okay.
He can stamp
In
his feet all he won. He just won a Super Bowl. So I mean,
right. We know just from the history of fantasy football and stuff, Saquon is not going to get another 2,000 yards. It's not going to happen. We know that
I
Saquon is
agree. I agree.
like, to me, the Eagles offense is pretty predictable and it is what it is. We know that Jalen Hurts is going to be getting those tush pushes. We know it's going to happen. But in my opinion, the passing offense improves significantly, making Jalen Hurts more valuable than the QB7. Do you agree?
I think that wherever he's ranked next year, folks are going to draft him higher than that because he just won a Super Bowl. He just won
Okay.
the MVP. Now, do I agree with you? Saquon's not going to have a 2,000-yard year. I don't think he's going to. Do I think Jalen Hurts is a better fantasy quarterback than when the numbers he had averaging this year? I do. Do I think that the they also ran the ball? I think I saw it somewhere. 56% of the time, Philadelphia ran the ball in 24. So that significantly cuts into anything, you know, quarterback wise you're going to have. You do all the tush pushes in the world. I mean, you're not going to score 20 rushing touchdowns as a quarterback. It's not realistic. So
Right.
a guy like Jalen Hurts, I'm not taking early in the draft. I'm going to sit and wait and let somebody else take that
Well, I
because,
guess that depends on what you define as early, I guess. So, I
like,
mean,
if folks are going to, I think folks are going to take him second and third round because of
and
everything
that's
that
too
how the
much. Right.
correct, and I agree with you. So I'm not touching that early. If he's
I wouldn't
sitting,
even. I don't know if you're right about that with ADP. We'll wait and see. But I wouldn't. I mean, to your point, I wouldn't even take Josh Allen second round. I mean, like, but again, our philosophy on how early we go on quarterbacks is just crazy. Like, it's just
but I
or
think you would
what
agree.
we don't do. Yeah.
Right, but I think you would agree in that you would be more comfortable if like you're required to take a quarterback in the second round. You're taking Josh Allen far earlier than you are going to far more comfortably than you're going to take Jalen Hurts in the second round. Is that fair?
If I was forced to take a second round quarterback, yes, Josh Allen, obviously, yes. But
Also, I don't know how often Philadelphia is going to be up, you know, double digits in points in games where they're going to be able to run the ball 56% of the time. That number I'm suspecting is going to come down to be closer to 50-50 or maybe be under 50%. So that also helped Jalen Hurts for next year to give you better numbers overall. Even though people drafted him, you said, as the third quarterback, he finished as the seventh.
right.
Sure. So that's a bit of a drop off considering what the total points were per year, but I have a little bit of concern moving into 25 if, you know, th- especially for the Barkley owners, he Jalen Hurts is going to be fine as a quarterback. I'm just not taking him that early,
Yep.
and I think he's going to go early. But,
And you weren't part of it. We could probably just weigh in. We don't have to go too deep, but we had a bit of an argument on who should be the running back one next year.
oh,
In my opinion, it should not be Barkley. It should be Bijan. Do you agree or disagree with that?
uh, I think you're in the minority. I think folks are going to take Barkley as the number one overall back. Do I think Barkley, considering also his injury history, do he's going to finish as the RB1 next year? No. Do I think Derrick Henry's going to go early? Yes. I would take, if I had to choose between Barkley and Bijan, I'm taking Bijan number one overall. Boy, I hope I don't get the first overall pick next year because that's a hard decision to do there because you're probably taking a running back at number one overall. But
I
oh,
guess depending on your format. I know a lot of people in full PPRs might be looking to take Jamar Chase with the number one, but
he's
depending on.
got to get paid first. So we got to see if he's
Yeah.
going to be there.
All right, let's move on to a name that's horrific for us. If anybody doesn't know, the both of us here are Jets fans, but maybe there's a silver lining at the end of this. So finishing at number 8 is Mr. Sam Darnold Schwarzenegger. So Sam Darnold finishing with 312 points. I mean, there was a stretch in there where he was really great, especially. I mean, he had maybe a couple games in there that were not so good, but he had a lot of great games, and he just looked great. Now, uh, let's any conversation we're going to have about Sam Darnold from a fantasy perspective is one thing, but let's separate that from the NFL thing. Okay. So here's the conversation for fantasy. Sam Darnold had a great year. He looked great. Here's the conversation for the NFL. Sam Darnold had a great year. He looked great and then looked absolutely awful the last game of the year and then in the first game of the playoffs. So bad that those two games that he played that had nothing to do with fantasy changed the entire narrative about what the Vikings are going to be doing as their in their quarterback situation. Because before those two games, the narrative was he's going to be returning to Minnesota. He's going to be playing for them, whether JJ McCarthy gets traded or whether he just becomes an understudy. Sam Darnold's team. After those two games, now we're talking about trading him. Now we're talking about bridge quarterback, like a whole thing. So I don't know how we even have a conversation about Sam Darnold without the fact that everything we might say might be irrelevant for next year.
Well,
So
there's
like,
there's a couple of angles to look at this. Yes, the last two games that he played in, he was abysmal. Do I think that's going to affect him in 2025, whether or not he comes back to Minnesota or not? I don't. I don't think Minnesota, regardless if he even had the 2 weeks that the last 2 weeks that he played were terrible, or if he played well those last 2 weeks, I don't think he was coming back regardless. They signed Daniel Jones to their practice squad in December of last year, so he is
I forgot
probably
about
going to be
that.
their he's probably going to be their QB2 next year. They drafted McCarthy 10th overall in 2024. They let him sit with the meniscus injury for the year. He is their quarterback moving forward. From Minnesota's perspective, either they could franchise him and trade him, which I wouldn't honestly recommend. They have too many other needs as a team to focus on rather than dealing with the Sam Darnold uh, uh, story. They're better off letting Sam Darnold go out the pasture and go play the free agent market and see what he's able to go get. Where he goes, I don't think really matters in regards to fantasy football. I am not touching him with a 10-foot pole. To me, I don't think there is any organization that would sign him to be their QB1 in 2025. He's going to put up anywhere near the numbers he did last year. I think he finished with 35 touchdowns and 11 interceptions. And in Kevin O'Connell's offense, in that dome in Minnesota with Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison, I don't think there's any other situation he can go to that a team is going to let him start where he's going to put up anywhere near those numbers. So absolutely for the folks, they got a brilliant amount of value for him for 2024. I am running for the hills away from him in 2025.
I uh I agree. Let's say for the sake of argument, he's back with Minnesota
Hmm.
next year. Okay. Would your opinion change?
I don't think he's well.
You-
He did enough last year to earn himself some sort of contract that's not a 1 year prove it kind of deal. So I do think there's going to be somebody out there on the market that's going to offer him some sort of contract. If Minnesota wants to bring him back and they really do franchise him, somebody will give them some sort of offer for Sam Darnold, where I think they're better off letting him go. There's no way they're going to let Sam Darnold be the backup
So you
quarterback.
can't answer this question assuming that he's back in Minnesota. It's just an irrelevant question for you.
Because I don't think he signs back with them on like a
Okay.
1 year. Because he signed a $10 million 1 year deal last year. I don't
Okay.
think he takes that deal this year. And they franchise him. I think the QB franchise number this year is somewhere around the mid 40s, which you want your QB2 to be getting paid
No.
$42 million sitting, hold a clipboard. That's
No,
not
I thought that my answer to this with the other guys was that I thought that they would find a way to keep him on the team. And then I didn't think they was going to franchise him, but I think that those last two games did enough to stifle a little bit of what his commanding price is going to be. And so they were going to find a way to keep him on the team. And then at some point during the season, JJ McCarthy takes over, they trade him during the season. But
well,
again,
we'll see.
now we're prognosticating. So I can't, for all of the viewers, Johnny and I can't, tell you what to think about Sam Darnold yet. We just don't have enough information. I'll just say we'll revisit this later in the offseason. Pretty
Let
simple.
me
I mean,
let me ask you this: if he's back in Minnesota,
yeah,
as you appear to have that opinion, and he is their QB1, and let's say he's quarterback for the entire year, and JJ McCarthy sits again. Let's just say, do you think he puts up the same numbers he did last year?
the same, no, but I think I would think about him as a top 12 quarterback, a quarterback that should be rostered on your team. Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, if not, I mean, we should kind of mention this. We had this conversation about the tight ends. Onesie positions are pretty interesting because, once you get beyond the top couple of guys, even the guys that are well within the top 12, but the lower, like 6 to 12, 7 to 12 or whatever, like they're interchangeable with other guys that you could be inserting in there that might get, you know what I mean? Like then at
Right.
that point, you're quote unquote streaming. You're trying to get the best thing. And I think
Right.
Sam Darnold would fit into that category for me for next year. Like I would much rather, throw in Mahomes if he's on a, you know what I mean? Depending on how his season's going, if he's on a good week, you know what I'm saying? Like it depends on whatever the matchups are. So, and Sam Darnold to me is completely in that category. He's not in a start every single week without thinking about it. It's funny because a lot of the guys we mentioned are definitely in the, like some of the guys we mentioned up higher than him: Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Joe Burrow, Jaden Daniels, and Jalen Hurts. They're in a start, don't think about it category. Sam Darnold's not, in my opinion.
I agree.
So let's move on to a guy who maybe he could turn into that. So unbelievable year from number 9, Bo Nix, finishing with 295 points. Such a great season from out of nowhere from the rookie. I mean, if he wasn't drafted, if he was, I mean, it's the QB 25. That's irrelevant. Um, Basically, once you got past the first couple games, as he was kind of getting his big boy shoes on, he was great the rest of the year. Basically, from week 5 on, he was unbelievable. He had one maybe not so good game, but after that, it was just great. We kind of talked about this a little bit when we talked about the wide receivers. So Cortland Sutton was the biggest beneficiary of Bo Nix. There was, I forget what the length of time was, but there was a period that Cortland Sutton was like the wide receiver 4 for until like the end of the year based on just consistent production. And Bo Nix runs the ball. Going into next year, it's another year in Sean Payton's offense. They're going to be building it up. Denver is, I think, the highest on the list behind Dallas to be drafting Gianti. So they do that. It's just more help for Bo Nix. I see nothing but bright stuff ahead for him. Do you agree?
I do. As much as I don't, I'm shaky on sophomore year quarterbacks. He is somebody
Right.
that I'm actually pretty comfortable with. If I want him to be my QB1 for the year. Yes, obviously at a rocky start to the season, which with most rookie quarterbacks, it's a rough go of it their first year. So for him at least, yeah, I was absolutely able to turn on the Jets. We'll see if Cortland Sutton's going to be back in Denver because they were flirting with whether or not they're going to trade him or let him go. So we'll see where that goes. But I do agree with you. I do think that he's going to be somebody to be reckoned with for next year. Uh, Obviously, folks are going to draft him considerably higher than where he got drafted this year. But I would look for a different quarterback that's right and around him. I would take a different quarterback, which we're going to discuss next, rather than him.
Yes. Well, let's just jump into that because now we're going to get into probably the probably the most interesting name on this. So finishing at number 10 is the best NFL quarterback in this list. It's Patrick Mahomes. Now, let me just lay the land here, okay? So you drafted him as the QB2, he finishes the QB10. Obviously not so good.
Mhm.
However, it should be pointed out that there was some caution, like you saw what happened the prior year. This was a bad Patrick Mahomes year in the current offense that he's in. I don't know why anybody would think that that would change. Nothing else changed for the offense. Same Matt Nagy, no significant personnel changes other than like I mean you knew Rasheed Rice went down before the season even started. Hollywood Brown was tertiary to some degree. Like nothing functional changed. That having been said, we're not going to play Monday morning quarterback here. It was
Right.
what it was the year. So here's the situation, okay? And we've seen this with Brady years, we've seen this with some other years with some various other quarterbacks. Patrick Mahomes does what he has to in whatever that game is to win. But remember now, they're also beholden by whatever the offense is. And if anybody watched these Kansas City teams, this is a dissipated Travis Kelce completely. He gave up on like he out of shape, gave up on caring about like whether or not he comes back for next year. I have no faith in Travis. Oh, he's going to carry Patrick Mahomes to a more relevant. No faith in that whatsoever.
He's
Unless
35 now, so at some point,
unless in my opinion, now Patrick Mahomes is going to be out for revenge and the Chiefs are going to be locked and loaded like they're always going to be great. But unless the Chiefs have some type of offensive scheme change or some more firepower, like I remember saying to the guys, I'm like, why don't they just throw it deep to Worthy every play? Watching the Super Bowl, like it was so plotting. Now, let me just lay this. I want you to comment on this. If you just look at his fantasy year,
right.
Patrick Mahomes busted for you a grand total of 0 times. Did not bust once. Did he win you any week? Maybe 1 week, maybe 2 weeks. That's a
Yeah.
decent floor. Like he's not going to lose it to you, but at no point did he. Now, like I said, more of the same unless Casey does something significantly different. Let's talk about Mahomes. What do you think?
All right, so let's get into this. So, why did Philadelphia win this Super Bowl? It really had nothing to do with their
Oh
offense.
yeah, the
It,
offensive line. Yeah,
it had everything to do with that front four getting
crushing
consistent
them.
pressure on Patrick Mahomes. He would go to read one,
Turnstile. Their offensive
read
linemen were turnstiles. Yeah.
right. He'd go to read one, read two, start to dance, and do his Mahomes magic. And he didn't have anywhere to go because the defensive line was there and taking him down to the ground.
Right.
Where Kansas City in the offseason is going to go, and I think you would agree with me on this, they're going to free agent offensive linemen, they're going to draft free offensive linemen, and then they're going to get more offensive linemen. So
Okay.
that's their by far number one need as a team, offensive line to keep Patrick Holmes upright. That Super Bowl, I do think, goes a little different and it's not so one sided if they had a protection for him.
That's true.
Rasheed
And
Rice got
Rasheed
hurt.
Rice is coming back. You're right.
He,
Right.
he got hurt, I think, week 4 or 5. So he got hurt early in the NFL season. A lot of other receivers they've taken the last couple of years have not come to fruition. But I think with Worthy, with Rasheed Rice, with a healthy who broke his leg for their
Uh
running back.
oh the Pacheco.
So with a healthy Pacheco going in the next year, they just got absolutely embarrassed in the
Right.
Super Bowl. I do think you're going to have an angry Patrick Mahomes that's going to put up MVP kind of numbers for 2025.
Now, this is important because he put up MVP numbers the year after losing Tyreek Hill. Now, you got to remember how that year went. That's when Travis Kelce was still at the top of his game. Uh, but he had a cast of characters that was commensurate with that. So he had that was the Jerick McKinnon year. That was, I mean, you had you had guys that were complementing that. Juju was still not completely awful at that point. You had other guys on the team. So, I mean, I'm just looking at their team now and how dissipated Kelsey is. And just like, other than like, where's their explosiveness other than Worthy? Like,
So
what?
with a healthy Rice as their wide receiver in one, Worthy takes the top off for you. Pacheco is your running back. I don't think Hunt's going to be back next year. And with a significantly rebuilt offensive line and letting Tooney play guard, which is where he was supposed to play instead of playing left tackle, because I saw him out there and I watched him in the playoffs. He's not a left tackle; he's a guard.
No,
So they,
And Caliendo might be the worst offensive lineman I think I've ever seen in my life. But yes. All right.
but I think with all that now, is Kelsey going to be back next year? I don't know. I he may have
It'd be better for them if he doesn't. Like,
for Kansas City, yes. For Kelsey and his legacy, I mean, I don't know what else this guy needs to kind of prove at this point. He's won multiple Super Bowls. He's been, an absolute focal point of that offense for, better part of a decade. At some point, it's time to, call it a day. I don't know if he's going to want to go out that way, but we'll see. But like obviously this is a fantasy show, so let's get
yeah,
back
yeah.
to Mahomes. I don't think I see scenarios
You see
where
a significant improvement, is what you're
I,
saying.
I I think that if they get the offensive line right, that's the big caveat, which Andy Reid is an excellent coach, and I think they're going to be able to figure out what they're going to do offensive line wise. He's going to be in the MVP conversation next year. So I think for guys that are drafting for 2025, he's a steal because I don't think he's going to have a high ADP. And I think there's going to be a lot of other quarterbacks that are going to go before Mahomes because of the last couple of years being what they've been. But I'm of the
I
opinion
hope you're right because I'd be willing to, if Mahomes drops, I'd be willing to take that shot and see how things shake out, and then if it doesn't work
if he
out,
fell, oh yeah, if he fell to the fifth or sixth round and like because he's been taken in the
eh,
second round just about every year the
right.
last 6 years or so. If he fell to the fifth or sixth round, like obviously I'm higher on him than you are, I would snatch him up in a second. So
Well, you might not necessarily. I mean, I'll wait to see what those off-season moves are, but also it'll be interesting to see where his ADP shakes out for the next year. But if, like you were saying, if it's like fifth round, I mean, I would love for Patrick Mahomes to be in a space where I could take a shot on him, wait and see how that offense looks, and if it's not looking good week one or two, then maybe I make a change, drop, pick up. You know what I mean? Um, but I think the name itself carries so much worth that he's never going to fall past a certain point. So, like there's going to be guys maybe valued much later on that you'd want to wait on. But,
I would take Patrick Mahomes over Bo Nix for next year. I
oh,
would do that.
see how we'll see how the ADP shakes out. So let's talk about a miserable name. This is another one that we had a lot of strife about. So Kyler Murray finishing as the quarterback 11, finishing with 280 points, and you draft him as the QB8. So already just on draft, it was a disappointment, but that doesn't do this justice. You drafted Kyler Murray with the idea that he could finish as the QB one or two. Like all that promise. This is a running quarterback. This is a quarterback with a new toy weapon in Marvin Harrison and a complete failure. From a fantasy perspective, what you don't want is non-predictability. You want to be able to rely on somebody. He's going to get you your points. He's not going to kill you that often. If he does, all you got from Kyler was this roller coaster the entire year. And you, me and the guys, we spent the entire year lamenting the Arizona offense, and it kept annoying us and annoying us and annoying us. We talked about the Marvin Harrison situation, and this is where we landed on. There's so much blame to go around. It's not just one thing. We wanted to throw blame on Kyler, and believe me, he deserves it. We wanted to throw blame on Marvin Harrison, who did not live up to expectations, who did not look like he was running that good of routes. And Anthony brought it up that we're not putting enough blame on Gannon from just like a failure of the schemes and getting them open or whatever. So where do you fall on this? Is this just like more down the chute for Arizona, or are things going to improve? What is your take here?
I guess you guys are all in the poo-poo parade here for Kyler Murray. I don't
Arizona in general, but yeah.
for just refresh my memory. Did they give a Connor a contract extension late last year? Because I
Yes.
thought, okay, so he's going to
Connor
be
was
back.
the only one that wasn't a problem in Arizona.
I do think that for Kyler Murray, because this is now I think year 3 or 4 of his big money contract. That like this is kind of the make it or break it year for if he's going to get a second contract in Arizona. I'm perfectly fine. I would rather have him as my quarterback because of his rushing ability, because he does play in a dome and he plays in warm weather. Yes, this year it was, as you stated, all over the place, roller coaster wise, but I do think it'll be a little more consistent into next year in regards to how they're going to run their offense. So I'm not nearly as throwing cold water on Murray as you folks are.
Okay. So then, I mean, and you'd see a bounce back you'd see Marvin Harrison making some improvements then next year.
I do. There was a reason why he was absolutely dominant in college, and I do think a lot of that will translate to the NFL. I just thought that for a huge chunk of the year, they just weren't on the same page. They
Okay.
couldn't figure out how they wanted to run their routes, etc. So I think in a full off season together, figuring out how this offense is going to look with the extension for James Conner, which I do like James Conner as their back for them there. I do think they're going to be better.
Do you?
Um,
I would be remiss if I didn't mention on behalf of Tommy. So do you put any any stock in the Call of Duty narrative for Kyler?
Listen, I know he's a small quarterback and everything. Like, all right, these guys are allowed to have hobbies outside of football. Like some guys are more obsessed, but like some guys are more obsessed with
You
the
know,
game. Others, he's just not as obsessed, I think, as somebody like maybe Tom Brady was. But
I'm 95% with you. But the 5% that throws me off is I forget what quote he said at the end of the season. He said that according to him, the coaches told him not to throw the ball to Marvin Harrison. So I don't know what baloney that is, but that's my point with Kyler and with Arizona. There's a lot of baloney going on with them. And it's like if you're making an investment into a fantasy quarterback who's going to get you upside and you got to rely on this guy who's going to get you point, like I have nothing but fear when it comes to Kyler in the offense. But maybe we'll see how ADP shakes out or whatever, and
yeah,
maybe you're
I
feeling better
I'm
about it.
not I'm not reaching for Kyler. But
Oh yeah, yeah.
If Kyler's that like how you and I normally draft where we take quarterbacks late, and he's the guy that's there of the 3 or 4 guys to choose from, I'll take Kyler. I'll take that chance.
Yeah. Well, let's move on to QB 12, another NFC West quarterback. So Brock Purdy, the quintessential low end QB one. Basically, that's how we see him. It's what he is. It's how he finished. Finishing with 279, just behind Kyler. His average is slightly better because he did miss a game. Now Brock, he did have some bust games in there. There's no way around it. And towards the second half of the year, there was a couple more of them. I mean, his week 13 and week 15 were just awful. Now he did put in some week winning performances for you in your semifinals and finals, but it's worth mentioning those things. Now, to some degree, Brock Purdy is was hampered by the lack of by the complete disappearance of Debo on top of the Ayuk injury and obviously Christian McCaffrey in and out the lineup. Now, I actually went back and forth with some of the guys about I think it's being overdone the San Francisco excuses, let's say, because I mean McCaffrey in and out the lineup, but Jordan Mason filled in so nicely, so they didn't really miss a beat there. And the Ayuk injury, like Jennings was just better. Like so we were talking about Jennings, and my opinion was I'd be all in on Jennings next year. To me, he showed me something. This isn't just a fluke type of thing. Purdy had a connection with him. On top of the fact of Kittle picking up a lot of the business, finishing as the tight end one, I'm going to be, my only issue with Purdy is the same thing to a much lesser degree, I would say about Burrow. This is a quarterback who, I mean, he like we were saying, he doesn't run the ball that much, if at all. He is a pocket passer, similar to the Joe Burrow situation, but to a lesser degree from an effectiveness and from a fantasy perspective. So, I mean, I kind of see him that way every single year. Low in QB1, not the highest degree of upside, dependent on weapons. But I mean, we can have a separate NFL conversation because from an NFL perspective, I think he's a great quarterback. And I'm getting annoyed hearing people in the media take him down. But we're just talking fantasy here. So how do you see Brock?
We could probably spend 20 minutes on Brock Purdy in San Francisco, going in what happened for 24 and going into 25. For fantasy purposes for Brock Purdy, yes, Ayuk was an absolute disaster prior to the injury and then tore his ACL. I think they're going to end up trading Debo or releasing him. I don't think he's going to be back in San Francisco next year. That's going to open up door for some other guys, Juwan Jennings, in order to actually get considerable more touches on for the course of the whole season rather than just for a portion of it. How much longer is George Kittle that guy? How much longer? He has, he's always going to miss some time every year. Christian McCaffrey missed basically the whole season. I don't know how much longer he's going to be that guy as well. So there's a lot of retooling that's going to have to go on in San Francisco going into 2025. The defense is getting Robert Saleh as a defense coordinator. I think that's a very, very good move for them in order to, settle things down as an organization. In regards to him now getting paid, he is going to get paid. The San Francisco is going to pay him whatever it is, 52 million, 55 million, whatever it's going to be per year. Is he worth that number? I don't think so. I think he's far more elusive than what you think. I've seen him run around and almost almost as much magic as Patrick Mahomes has with being able to be elusive. But I would be
I don't want
leery.
to I don't want to derail this conversation because we can talk forever about this. My just so that you hear my quick opinion on it, it's that my genuine opinion is that none of these quarterbacks are worth this amount of money. You don't need 50 million. You could be just fine with 30 million, and then the rest of that money could go to elsewhere on the like in the team. I don't care what your quarterback's name. Like they're being paid a factors so much more than the other people on the team that it's a detriment to their team that they're making that much. And that applies to every single quarterback. I'm not singling anybody out. That having been said, I don't make the rules. So if you're going to pay guys like Daniel Jones 40 plus million, X person 50 million, X person 48 million, then you absolutely better pay Brock Purdy that amount of money because he is better slash as good slash than these guys that you could name. I'm sick of getting like the system quarterback thing. It's not just watch them. It's not how it works. That's kind of my point. So I don't think he should get 50 million, but I don't think anybody should get 50 million. So
We can spend days
yeah,
on the
we could
money
spend
part.
forever on them.
But
Well,
on
I'll t- yeah,
yeah,
on the fantasy perspective, how do you see Brock? So
uh, he's probably, as you kind of put it, as a low end QB1, high end QB2. I'm not, moving mountains to go get him. If he falls to me, if I was to take my quarterback late, I'm fine with him being my quarterback. Do I think he's going to have a bad year next year? No. But do I think he's going to put the world on fire? I don't think so either. I think there's a lot of retooling that's going on in San
yep.
Francisco that they're not necessarily going to be a Super Bowl team next year, but they're going to be considerably better as an organization than what they were this year because this year they were a disaster.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. We'll see how we'll see the retooling in the off season.
Right.
So now that's quarterbacks 1 to 12, which we covered. We're also going to talk a little bit here about we'll quickly get through some honorable and dishonorable mentions, and then some special players who is going to aggravate slash not aggravate us, which we'll get to. So let's just quickly talk about some honorable mentions. So I could tell you, you know, hey, we just mentioned Brock Purdy and Kyler Murray. I could tell you that the name we're going to mention now, I'd probably be interested in having over them. So finishing at QB 13 is actually Justin Herbert. Now, he was drafted as the QB 17, basically on the idea that he was never going to pass the ball ever. This is Jim Harbaugh's crazy punch you in the mouth team defense running. And for the first 5, 6 games of the year, that's exactly what happened. But they pulled the gloves off at some point when they started getting their feelers from under them. From week 8 on, he was well into the top 10 of quarterbacks. Had a great season. They made it to the playoffs. It was a great year for Justin Herbert and the first year with the Harbaugh offense. I'm a big fan of Ladidi McConkey, Lad McConkey, and
Stole
presumably
him
they're
from me. You stole him from me last year.
and presumably a they're going to be, if they're not drafting, they're going to be bringing in like a big name wide receiver to complement them because Quentin Johnston is not the answer. So I see I'm going to be very high on Justin Herbert going into next year.
I couldn't agree with you more. I'm absolutely very, very high on Justin Herbert going in for 2025. They ran the bejesus out of the ball for the better part of the first half of the year. Once they allowed him to start opening things up a little bit, like you see the talent of why he was drafted so early and where he was. I just think they needed an organizational structure around him that's going to be able to have things to give him tools for success moving forward. I absolutely do think they either draft a number one receiver or they go sign somebody like a T. Higgins to be the number one receiver. So I absolutely do think that he's going to be in that top 6-ish, 7-ish conversation to finish as a quarterback for next year. So I absolutely 100% agree with you.
I agree. Another honorable mention, Bryce Young. I did not think I was going to be saying this name. So he finishes the QB 24, but that's irrelevant. The point is that at some point when he came back to starting, he got his big boy pants on and he started playing like an actual quarterback and he started looking really good. From week 12 on, he was well into he was at the QB 9, I think, if I remembered, and he basically helped win you a championship. Week 16, 27 points, and week 17, 17 points. It was a great end of the year for Bryce Young. I don't know if Tommy's favorite fantasy player, Adam Thielen, if he's going to be back next year. We're not sure. But considering the improvement that Bryce Young made, I'm inclined to put him into a streaming category for next year with some maybe top 12 upside. What do you think?
I'm not as high on Bryce Young for fantasy purposes than what you are. I do think, yes, he showed significant improvements in the second half of last year for sure. I mean, anything was better than what we saw the first year plus he played. So, do I think he's going to be a quarterback to be reckoned with? I mean, could you stream him a couple of times during the course of the year if you need a quarterback and your guy's on a bye? Yes, but I don't think he's somebody where I'm taking as my first quarterback and like that's my plan for the majority of the year. I don't think he's that guy.
Another honorable mention. So Dak Prescott, so he was injured for most of the year, obviously, but first 5 weeks he was pretty good. He had one really big blow up week. Um, he'll be back next year starting. I mean, God knows what Jerry Jones is going to do with whatever their offseason moves in Dallas, but they're slated pretty much. They're pretty much. If it was on Mel Kiper's board, it was on every single draft board that they're the top team to take Gianti as their running back, and they need it. Unfortunate for me, guys who are fans of Rico Suave, but if they do, I'm going to be a little bit more even bullish on the Cowboys. But we know what Dak Prescott is. He's a top 12 quarterback when he plays, and he's got a great top tier option in CD Lamb. Just depends on where in that top 12 you want to roll with him. Sound about right to you?
I have to say I don't know what's been more of a circus the last year plus, if it's been the Jets or Dallas. I really don't know. But for Dak Prescott fantasy wise, yes, he's going to finish, as QB1 somewhere in that top 12 range. I have no idea what this offense is going to look like next year because they still are in salary cap hell, and I have no earthly idea what Jerry Jones is going to do as an owner. So realistically speaking, I think the peak of what Dak Prescott was for fantasy football is over that 3 year stretch where they had 12 wins each of those 3 years. So I don't think he's going to reach those levels again. Is he somebody that I think on the order of what Brock Purdy is, where you can stream him in there, or somebody like I think he's better than Bryce Young, but I would be more comfortable streaming Prescott over Young. But I don't think he's somebody where I can go into next year with so much uncertainty in Dallas, thinking, "Oh, that's my quarterback one, and he's going to play 14 games for me."
Well, I mean, he's done it in the past. It's just, I guess, we have to see what Jerry Jones
That
does.
Dallas is an absolute mess, and their salary cap is still a mess.
Yeah.
So Lord knows what talent they're going to be able to bring in to be able to protect him and for him to be able to throw to.
If Micah Parsons goes, and if whatever other defensive pieces go, and if Dallas's defense is worse, that'll be good for Prescott. So
Yeah,
we'll have to throw to keep up.
good luck stopping Philadelphia's rushing game. Good luck with
Yeah,
that.
yeah. All right, let's talk a few dishonorable mentions. We'll leave the last name just for the moment. So I'm going to throw the four names at you, and you tell me which one was the most disappointing, considering position, upside, etc. I know which one you're going to say, but let's just say. So we got CJ Stroud finishing as the QB 18, was drafted as the QB 5. Anthony Richardson was finished as the QB 23, drafted as the QB 6 for some reason. Jordan Love finishing as the QB 16, drafted as the QB 9, and Caleb Williams finishing as the QB 15, drafted as the QB 11. But I know a lot of people were looking for some serious upside. So of those four names, which one was the most disappointing to you?
Probably Richardson. It, I I don't understand how he can complete 50% of his passes and like on a consistent basis. At some point, you need to show some sort of improvement in order to be able to stay on the field and be, starting NFL quarterback. I mean, the average now in the NFL for completion percentage is somewhere in the low 60s. He's not even touching the high 50s here. So, yes, he's an absolutely tremendous talent with his size and ability, but you got to be able to complete some passes, man. So, he's my disappointments.
Yeah, I don't. Yeah, go ahead.
Jordan Love and Caleb Williams, I think they're going to be absolutely fine next year. Jordan Love, I think, just had a down year with all the injuries in and out of the lineup for their receiving core.
Yeah,
Caleb Williams, I think, with Ben Johnson and all those talented receivers and pass catchers around him, I think they're going to put a couple of other pieces on the offensive line to protect him. I think he's going to be just fine.
I agree.
So,
I agree with you. And it's probably not. And we've already discussed just ad nauseum this season the CJ Stroud regression. So we've all seen it. And I think my point about it was so they fired Slowett. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that right, the offensive coordinator. So they clearly recognized that something was wrong. That having been said, with Joe Mixon, they kind of morphed into a more running offense anyway. So in my opinion, I feel like the truth is somewhere in the middle from this crazy, crazy upside that people were hoping for versus the awfulness that it was this year. I'd see Stroud somewhere in the middle of those two
he'll
things.
he'll be
You know,
better next
he'll
year.
be
I don't
better.
know.
How
I
much?
don't know if he's going to put up his rookie numbers.
Right.
So we'll see.
All right, let's talk about the last dishonorable mention. So we've got on here Captain Kirk. So Kirk Cousins finishing as the as the QB 20, which is irrelevant, and drafted as the QB 18. Now, yeah, he did not play the last two games of the year because he was replaced for Michael Penix, but he was not. He just was not good. I mean, you watch the games. There was, man. If you think some people have lack of mobility, you're not worse than Kirk Cousins.
Oh,
No mobility whatsoever. It was just bad. Now, we have him in here to kind of talk quickly about. So Penix, maybe what we're thinking about next year. I think there's a lot of promise for next year. I won't be taking Penix, obviously, in the top 12, but maybe he could turn into a decent streaming option. I saw some flashes there. It'll be his next year starting. He'll have his ups and downs, etc. Captain Kirk, though, I mean, he's definitely going to another team because he openly said he does not want to be the backup for Atlanta. So, which team is he going to? And it better not be the New York Jets.
well, spoiler alert, I do think that the Jets are at least going to make a couple of phone calls for Kirk Cousins and see if he's willing to come here and like the same thing Russell Wilson did for last year, a 1 year, $1 million contract, because Atlanta's still going to pay him, I think, 27 million guaranteed for 2025. You mentioned Michael Penix. I'm very eagerly curious to see what he looks like in a full NFL season. If I'm a fantasy owner moving into next year, like I would like to have Michael Penix sitting on my bench and take, Brock Purdy to be maybe my starting quarterback. And that's my pair for the year, Purdy and Penix, something like that. Why? because I do see a significant amount of upside for Michael Penix moving in for 2025 because they do have receivers there and whatnot. Lord knows what the tight end for Atlanta. I'm forgetting his name. He's been a disaster the last 4 years.
Kyle
Is he good?
Pitts.
Kyle Pitts. Is he good or not? Can he run routes? We still
No,
don't know.
no,
We have
he's
no
not.
idea anymore. Still don't know. 4 years later, still don't know. But I would I'm high on Penix for next year. Having him as a pair as my on my bench with somebody like Brock Purdy's a good idea. Kirk Cousins, I do think that he's going to want to go somewhere he's going to be able to compete to start, which obviously he told Atlanta he doesn't want to back up. The Jets are an option. I don't know how long he lasts as a starting quarterback in New York. If he is, I don't know. There may not be a spot for him to walk in and be the number one starter. Like he may have to fight for a job somewhere.
Well, let's parlay this conversation into the last two guys that I didn't know how to categorize them. This to our viewers, I don't know how to categorize them as honorable, dishonorable, but it's all relevant in the same conversation because all three of these quarterbacks could end up as quarterback in New York. Okay. So the other two names here, and we'll lump it in with Kirk Cousins. So finishing as the QB 17 is Mr. Ron Rodgers, drafted as the QB 19. So we knew it was going to be interesting. And then the QB 19, Matthew Stafford, drafted as the QB 20. So we don't know if Stafford's going to be back. I think we pretty much have it definitive that Rodgers is not going to be back. And like we just said about Kirk Cousins, he's probably not going to be back at Atlanta. So we could have a musical chairs of sorts here, maneuvering around with quarterbacks. I know
Don't
that
forget about Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. They're part of this musical chairs as well here.
they are, and for the sake of sanity, we did not have them in our show doc. So we've got a musical chairs worth of quarterbacks here. Relevantly for me, I mean, we could prognosticate about where people end up, but I will point out Aaron Rodgers did look pretty good towards the end of the year. Um, and I actually was at the game where he had the Devontae Adams crazy game at Jacksonville, and he did look good. I feel like this is the old Shannon Sharp thing that listening to him, great players as they age, it doesn't mean that they can't have great games or stretches, but they're going to have them less often. It's not going to be as consistent. And I agree with him 100% on that. I think that's kind of what we're seeing, what we saw from Aaron Rodgers, to our dismay. Matt Stafford, I mean, he's injured his back for the 88th time. He's about as, just mid-range QB2 for most of his career, other than maybe 1 year with the Cooper Cup crazy year. I mean, talk to me about the quarterback carousel here. Like,
all right, so I'm a lot higher on Stafford than I guess you are. By the way, you just described that. He wants to get one more contract. He wants some sort of multi-year deal. I don't think the Rams are going to do that. He's probably going to end up being somewhere else in 2025 because there was whispers over the course of the 24 season. Are the Vikings going to flop Darnold and
right.
Stafford? And where
And
are
then
they
the
going to
Rams
go?
killed them. And so they know they kept it. All right.
And like that kept the Rams still alive in the playoff hunt. And so that was the end of the story. For like, throw this scenario at you. Rodgers goes to the Rams. Stafford goes to the Giants to get some sort of 2 or 3 year deal. Kirk Cousins goes to our New York Football Jets. How's
Okay.
that set with you?
It sounds like the Jets are getting the worst end of the deal.
Hey, he's the cheapest option though. One million a year. Right. For me, for Matt Stafford, I don't think he's back with the Rams next year. I think they're gonna.
Here's a question for you, because we could prognosticate all we like. All three of these guys, do any of them have fantasy value next year?
I do. It just kind of depends on where they are. Kirk Cousins, don't touch for the love of God. I would play anybody over at quarterback. Stafford or Rodgers, depending on who you take as your QB1. I would not have Rodgers Stafford as my QB1, but they're stashable options depending on where they are. Like if you put Sean McVay and Rodgers together in LA, I do think a lot of good things can happen with that. Yes, Rodgers is going to be 42 years old, and he's probably not going to put up, MVP kind of numbers, but I do think by and large he's going to be better than what he was over a 17-game sample that he was with the Jets. Obviously, the second half of the year he was considered better with numbers wise for fantasy purposes for the Jets, and wow, what a surprise! He looked good in the sunshine at Jacksonville because Jacksonville has no pass defense. What a surprise! But I mean,
That's fair. Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah. So I mean, it remains to be seen. You know, God help anybody who ends up drafting any of these guys. I mean, we'll get into more in the offseason how it does with rankings, but again, we're pulling out people names like that where it's like we're not going to spend any time prognosticating, but everything that we could talk about depends on where they go. So we'll leave we'll leave sleeping thoughts as they lie. So any I know you mentioned Russ, who probably isn't worth having that much of a conversation. His best days are behind him. Any other names you wanted to mention? Fantasy relevant?
I mean, fantasy wise, no. I mean, there's obviously going to be a lot of carousels of quarterback for a lot of these NFL teams, and we're going to
Yeah.
figure out, which quarterbacks, because some of these guys, of the 5 or 6 guys we've mentioned, they're going to get streamed at some point over the course of next year too. So it kind of depends on the matchup
Right.
wise these guys are going to be sitting in and what teams they're on. But in no way, shape, or form am I taking those 5 or 6 guys and like, oh, that's my quarterback. That's this. I don't think that's a smart idea. I would
No,
much
who
rather
who'd
have
you?
Love or Caleb Williams. Much
Oh
rather.
yeah. I couldn't agree with you more. Yeah.
Mhm.
So there we go. So that covers top 12 quarterbacks, honorable, dishonorable mentions, and guys we didn't know how to categorize. So yeah, we'll be getting on to you guys with some more content going on into the off season, and at some point after the draft, we'll start getting to more draft strategy. We'll talk more about ADP. We'll talk more about how you think about drafts, the math involved, etc. So there we go. Thank you guys very, very much. If you like our stuff, like, share, and subscribe. And we'll be back to you guys next week. Thank you guys.
Thank you.